Sorry about my dog.
Hello, everyone that is joining. We are going to wait for a few more people to join, but if you want to, please drop in the chat your name, organization, and where you're based out of. So we can get a good feel for who's all here.
Can we add a fun one to that too? Add your favorite thing about fall. It is officially fall weather, sweater weather. So if you have a favorite thing about the fall, drop it in the chat too.
Okay, I see some cooler temps. People that love color.
Fashion, fall fashion, that's exciting. All right. Where are we at? I think we may have a good number to go ahead and get started. We're just letting folks trickle in. I think we're good. Shall we go ahead and get started, Laura?
Yeah, I think that'll be good.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us to advancing policy conversations with specifically conservative decision makers. We're excited to do this. We actually launched this toolkit and training last year, a little bit over a year ago, and we thought that with what we're seeing, what's happening in the election, and based on feedback from many of our advocates on the ground, that it was a good opportunity to kind of re-up this training and make sure that you guys have the best possible resources moving forward as we close out on the election and then looking at the election beyond. We know that that's just the first step, and then we're going to have to work with whoever ends up in office on the federal, state, local, and tribal level. So we're excited to do this. Again, welcome to this overview. My name is Joshua Harris, and I'm joining you today from Baltimore, which sits on the land of the Piscataway and Susquehannock peoples. I, of course, encourage you to learn more about the original stewards of the land where you live. It's important for us to know that. We just, of course, celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day. And welcome to this overview of advancing policy conversations and building relationships to have productive conversations with decision makers. Voices for Healthy Kids, of course, is an initiative of the American Heart Association, which works to advance equitable policies that make the places where babies, toddlers, kids, and their families live, learn, and play healthier. We partnered with, of course, the Pritzker Children's Initiative and have taken over the running of the NCIT, or the National Collaborative for Infants and Toddlers. So much of our work on this messaging has been applied to Prenatal-Three Policy, but can be applied across a wide subject area. Again, my name is Joshua Harris. I'm the Senior Manager of Marketing and Communications for the NCIT. I value collaboration, and doing this work makes me feel excited. Possibilities. Laura?
Thank you so much, Joshua. Again, thank you all for joining us. I am Laura Coleman, and I am the Advocacy Media Relations Manager for Voices for Healthy Kids. And I am based in Nashville, Tennessee, so I have been able to see a couple of fall leaves change and experience some cooler temps more than some of my friends from down south, as I am originally from Jackson, Mississippi. So hello to my cousins and my family. I will definitely say that I don't want you guys to get intimidated because I do have a small list, but I definitely value when it comes to this type of work, just the common ground and the respect for tradition and stability, just appreciating all of the emphasis on preserving cultural values, traditions, and stabilities. And this just helps me guide my approach when advocating for any type of change. And I definitely value the emphasis on local control. And I know that many conservatives prefer solutions that are locally governed rather than top down from federal entities. So just likely to value advocating for community-driven initiatives that respect local autonomy and self-determination. Doing this work definitely makes me excited as well, as Joshua stated, but it makes me hopeful for the future. So at this time, I know that I have introduced myself in a specific way and kind of touching on our values and feelings about this work. And this was just a preview of what we're going to share today. And I encourage you to pause right here and think about your own values and how this work of talking with decision makers make you feel. So we're just going to take just a few minutes, maybe about 4 to 5 minutes, and then we'll have a few of you all share. So what we're talking about is, what do you value and how does doing this work make you feel? So let's just take a few minutes and then we'll just have some volunteers or call on some people to share their answers.
Where we need intermission music.
Yes, we do. We do apologize that we don't have any soft music for you guys next time. And if you already had your answer and you want to come off mute really quickly just to share, feel free to do so. And then we'll move on.
I'll jump in, Laura. I value passion in the work. I love working with people that kind of exude an energy toward what they're doing. And when my needs are met in the work, when I'm feeling centered, I'm more energetic, and it allows me to kind of show up as my more authentic self.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Ben. I love that answer. Anybody else? We'll take 2 more. All right, don't be shy. Thank you, Lori, for sharing. She said that she values purpose and kindness. All right, and we'll do 1 more, and then we're going to move on.
I feel like Ashley wants to share with us.
Good morning, this is
Sure.
Karina. Oh,
We'll take
Go.
Katrina and Ashley.
okay. I can share briefly. Sorry, my camera's off. I'm feeling a little ill, but I value partnership and nurturing of like leaders and leadership. And my needs are met whenever those things happen, and it makes me feel thankful.
All right, thank you for sharing. And Ashley, we'll take you for honorable mention.
Okay. Thank you. I value knowledge and being respected. And I think in our field, in the early childhood field, I think that a lot of times there is possibly a lack of respect for what we do for the children of our communities. And I feel that my needs are met. I feel like I get excited.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And thank you all that has shared your answers and what you value and how doing this works make you feel in the chat. So in the next half hours, we're going to take you through a brief introduction to a new resource. And it's going to be a guide and training to support advocates working on Prenatal-Three policies. So this work came out of a request from advocates in our network to be able to help customizing messages and policy asks, especially when working with decision makers in conservative states. We'll share our research, messages, and audience strategy, and hopefully you guys will get something out of that. And we're offering something else too that we're hearing it's pretty unique and urgently needed. Support for advocates to find common ground on decision makers who hold differing views and to engage in these conversations in a non-polarizing and psychologically safe way. So you'll hear more about this from us, and you should choose and how you should choose to participate in a full training module. But of course, I'd like to go over our agenda as well. We're going to talk about some messaging and give some tips to advance policy conversations with decision makers, and those techniques to find common ground and support to do the work in a non-polarizing and psychologically safe way. So those are our big items today. Okay, next slide. So we want to highlight our full set of resources that we offer. We'll be able to share all of the links at the end. And so this is an outline guide that has detailed content and exercises on everything we'll discuss today and more. And you can take full training and you can join a community of practice with others doing this work. And so the Voices for Healthy Kids staff can provide technical assistance, and our work is only beginning, right? As capacity and funding allows, we will add to the library of offerings, and projects are chosen based on real world requests of advocates. So please dive in. And if there is something else that would help, make sure you ask us. Okay. Next slide.
Thank you so much, Laura. And really quickly too, I want to say that this training is about being smart in our strategy and how we are able to maintain our passion for this work, which is why it was important for us to open up with having you begin to think about what you feel in doing this work and what it is that you need. We have to maintain our passion. We all come to this work from different places. I'd imagine that anyone who's in the advocacy space isn't just doing it because it's a job. You feel connected to it in some way. So it's important to be able to connect and be smart about our strategy in that. And maintaining compassion for everyone's basic humanity. It's about being able to do our best work while still taking care of ourselves. In this current polarized political atmosphere, and as we're just a month out from election, we're seeing it only intensify. We need to make sure that we're taking good care of ourselves as well as our colleagues in order to avoid burnout and isolation. And so that's an important part of this, and being able to maintain that just even beyond the election when having conversations with conservative lawmakers. And so what we've done as part of this research is we've developed this concept of archetypes. And this research and resource focuses specifically on conversations with decision makers in conservative states, which I believe that many of you may have come from or participate in our conservative states calls to have these conversations in more depth. And it's where advocates were feeling the most opposition to Prenatal-Three policies. Eventually, we hope to expand our research to strengthen conversations with all decision makers, no matter where they fall on the spectrum. And you may notice that many of the lessons learned can be applied to many types of conversations and issues. So while we're specifically focused on Prenatal-Three, this is kind of a plug and chug module that you can apply to any advocacy area of work. Now, our first goal was to more deeply understand this group of decision makers and especially the values and needs of them. That values and needs that inform their policy work, because there's no one type of conservative decision maker. We developed and built out 4 archetypes, which are typical examples of a person or group. Those archetypes enabled us to explore more specific ways at approaching policy conversations. Now, there's more detail in the online guide about our methodology, but briefly, we developed the archetypes using existing research input from those both holding conservative and progressive viewpoints, and with advocates working in on Prenatal-Three issues in conservative states. as well as doing interviews with elected officials. The archetypes that we defined are church and country, economic influence, legacy Republican, and populist or populist aligned. And now, before I share more details about each of the archetypes, it's important for us to reinforce our commitment to do this work without stereotype or judgment. Instead, and I think on the previous slide you saw this, instead, we focus on understanding the feelings, needs, and core values within each archetype to help us advance productive debate and discussion. We all come to this from various places on the political spectrum, and we hope it will be as helpful to those of us who see ourselves reflected in any of the archetypes, as well as those that do not. Quick definitions. The definition of an archetype is a very typical example of a certain person or thing. The definition of a stereotype is a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing. Whereas stereotypes can reduce people to a simplistic idea in order to shut down curiosity and openness, archetypes gives us examples of people who may hold similar views and values in order to increase our understanding. You can use the archetypes as part of your analysis of any decision maker, helping you and your coalition or partners to determine who you will meet with, who the right people are to attend each meeting, what information you'll share, and of course, you'll have to do your own homework as part of that and understand the specifics, which is extremely important to being able to advance those conversations. Now, let me briefly introduce you to the archetypes. You'll find, of course, much more detail online on our online modules, which you can go through at your own pace. And so we'll post the links to that in the chat for your availability to go through later. This is really a high-level introduction to this. Next slide. Church and country. This is the first archetype that we defined. They are often seen as loyal to their chosen leaders. They are deeply influenced by conservative interpretation of Christian values and a moral approach. They feel called by their faith to help others, to be the protector of constituents and community. They often believe that churches and communities already have sufficient resources to help people. They take pride in position earned, and so there's kind of an expectation that others should work hard for what they desire in life. And at the same time, there's a sympathy for those in poverty, especially in rural areas. Their core values are faith, authority, tradition, control, and care. So I'd like to take a moment to pause and have you to begin to think about maybe a conservative lawmaker that you've worked with or engaged, and you can immediately think about, oh, this might be where their value systems lie, and they may fall into the church and country archetype along the spectrum of conservative lawmakers and decision makers. So we'll just pause for a second there. And it can be any leader on the federal, state, municipal, or tribal level that you've encountered and have done work with or want to work with. And again, these archetypes are designed to challenge us to begin to think at what are the value systems that drives some of these decision makers' decisions and how they interact. And so rather than making the assumption that, oh, they're just on the complete opposite end of the spectrum and there's no ability to get through them, what is it that they value and what is it that they need? Now, hopefully you have someone that you think falls into the church and country archetype. I want you to hold it because we're going to talk about it later. And we'll have you kind of share some of your ideas of why you felt someone fell into this archetype. Next slide. Economic influence. It's all about the money, money, money. Not necessarily, but Get it. This group is often highly educated and very financially secure. These decision makers tend to prioritize the economy and business strength and favor limited government. So when we hear folks talk about deregulation and less regulation, maybe there's someone who falls into the economic influence, right? They want less government interference and limited government. They are passionate about discussing the details of policy, especially the data and the numbers supporting it, so that they can more fully understand the cost, the benefits, and the return on investments. This group favors limited government, believing that the public sector alone is inefficient and ineffective for solving problems. Their values include freedom, individual choice, control, and the family unit and its freedom is essential. It can be helpful to show how proposed solutions remove barriers for families to maximize their own personal choices. So again, pause for a moment and think about a decision maker that you may have encountered who may fall into the economic influence, or maybe it's someone that you've even just seen speak on television and you haven't encountered them in real life, or on social media. Next slide. Legacy Republican. This is the third archetype that we've broken out. These decision makers are driven by traditional values of hard work and the American dream. They often represent the legacy Republican archetype. They value debate and are interested in other points of view and open to stepping outside of party lines. They're passionate about policy and most importantly about policy details. Their values are diligence, care, service, and leadership. Next slide. Populist aligned. These decision makers value individuals making efforts to advance themselves without outside help or government spending. They're led by constitutional ideals. And note, it's important to understand that the reason that we call them populist aligned and not simply using the term populist, that distinction is important because populists tend to be working class and have lower levels of academic completion. To the contrary, the populist aligned are often decision makers who make a concerted effort to appeal to populists while they themselves are often not from that background. They may fall into one of our other archetypes, but they use messaging and talking points to reach populists. They value individual efforts. There is often a resentment towards people who are not perceived to rightfully earn their benefits. This group believes that society does not need to make things fair for everyone. Their values are loyalty to America, diligence, and freedom. Now, of course, even with this more detailed look at conservative decision makers, no one fits neatly into one or the other. So our online guide also includes insights that hold true across all of the archetypes, including the strength of freedom as an overarching value, the very strong sentiment that people have an individual responsibility to take care of themselves and their families. And the fact that conservatives often feel judged and villainized by progressive advocates, which, as you can imagine, doesn't really set up for an open conversation for us to have on how we get to policy solutions. Now, I think it's extremely important to note that as we look at what these archetypes are that we've outlined, as I mentioned earlier, we are in the midst of an election, and what we are seeing is the polarization of the extremes of conservative decision makers without really an understanding of where their value systems come from, right? And so what we're seeing pushed out in front of us and the talking points are really the extremities, and it doesn't provide an opportunity for us to look at the potential intersection of values. And what we know is that in an election season, there's kind of a rush to convey or condense who individuals are or might be. But as advocates, we work in the long term. We are in it for the long haul. It takes time to create change, and we have to be able to have conversations and work with folks from different backgrounds. And so what that does is provide us the opportunity to sit down and have conversations and really identify what the values systems are of these decision makers, so that we can hopefully identify points of intersectionality, right? I think that we all have needs, feelings, and values. And so where might we find and identify those values? Now, the guide also gives you dials or ways to get more specific within each archetype. You can think of ways to turn up or turn down characteristics within an archetype. And that's based on a person's age, where they live, their life experiences. Are they a parent themselves? Do they have to pay for childcare? As well as other factors. So when having conversations, the online guide will give you ways that you can adjust, and also knowing, identifying who the best person is to connect with those dials and on that spectrum, and how to communicate and reach these individuals is important. Laura?
Thanks, Joshua. Right before we move on, if we can hold the slide, I think we wanted to give you all the floor and the opportunity to kind of share some of your examples of some of the archetypes that maybe you have, I don't want to say witnessed, but maybe worked with, to see what kind of decision makers are you guys working with in your respective states. So if anybody wants to share, Joshua, I don't mind if you lead that, just to kind of see what people came up with.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to use the raise your hand function, or come off of mute if you thought of someone that comes to mind, and if you'd like to kind of give us a description of that lawmaker, or what made you think that they fall into that specific archetype. And maybe it's not a lawmaker, maybe it's someone who's appointed by a lawmaker that you've worked with. So the floor is open, and I see a hand from Kathy.
Making sure I'm not on mute. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm from Mississippi. I've worked with legislators for over 40 years, mostly in this state. I have worked in DC, and I've worked with them there as well. But from a standpoint of where I live, I would say that we have a mixture of the archetypes that you have outlined here. We have, like in my conversations with them as late as yesterday, we have a populist, and one person, populist, legacy Republican, church and country, all in one, with some economic influence as well. But we have, again, a very conservative state. We are so red we squeak. And so I think with our folks, we have, I won't say a majority of Republicans, but I have seen more and more fewer true Republicans. Since I've done this for so long, I've been through lots of different iterations of Republicans and Democrats. And I think that the Republican handle or definition is probably changing on a national level too. And I think that's what's disturbing some Republicans on the national level, is because they're not the people that are representing themselves as Republicans really are not true Republicans. And that's my opinion, but I've heard it from others who are long-term, like Liz Cheney and others that are in the Republican Party nationally.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kathy. And I also like to pause and, as Laura did, say shout out to Mississippi. I grew up in a suburb of Mississippi called Chicago, Illinois. My entire family is from Mississippi, though, and I spent a lot of time. And it's interesting when I think about that area in the South, I think of the Bible Beltway, and thinking of a lot of conservative decision makers really falling into that church and country, just knowing how important church is in that beltway of the South, and that leads to a lot of decisions being made as well.
I grew up in Arkansas, and so I would say that in the last 5 years, I've kept in touch with people, and I know a lot of the folks are on here that are from Arkansas. It's nice to see my home represented, but I really do not see in terms of policy, even though they have a very Republican governor now, I have still seen Republican governors in the past at Arkansas be more progressive than the ones that we've had here in Mississippi. And that's just my observation and my opinion. So
Thank you so much, Kathy. Anyone else want to share someone that they've encountered or engaged with or experienced working with a decision maker that they feel fell into a particular archetype? All right, no worries. We'll have more time for Q&A at the end as we get into talk about the messaging. Laura.
Yes, thank you all. And thank you again, Kathy, and especially for just kind of highlighting the fact that you could have a particular lawmaker that represents all four of those archetypes. So it's not just a one-trick pony. Next slide. All right, so we're going to just be talking about finding some common ground. Next slide. And we're going to look at about how we're going to be applying non-polarizing communications as far as supporting your needs. So as we mentioned, this project is different from many other messaging guides because it incorporates a non-polarizing approach to finding common ground during challenging conversations, while also taking care of yourself and your team members. So a really effective way to find common ground, even when two seem to be worlds apart, and I know that we've all been a witness to that, is to connect on a level of our common humanity. So this means rather than focus on our opposing strategies, we focus on hearing and identifying feelings, needs, and core values that the other person is expressing. This is a new way of listening, and it allows us to understand the underlying motivators and not get stuck on specific strategies right away. I know Joshua mentioned how sometimes conservative lawmakers feel often judged. So this is a very key to remember. There may be a part of you that wants to find common ground and a part of you that feels frustrated, right? Or angry because you can't feel free to bring up the things you're passionate about, such as direct facts or structural racism. But non-polarizing truly means that rather than falling into a theme and us scenario, we speak and listen from a place of curiosity, because we want to understand where we can make a bridge between our core values and those of another person whose stance seems very different from ours. And it means staying connected to our own feelings, needs, and core values throughout this process. And so the guide outlines several ways that you can practice staying open and curious and find some common ground without surrendering what you hold most dear. So the guide is training addresses three interconnected channels of this work. The content, research, and strategy are what might be called the head. And as you can see, our fun little example, thinking the head, or the thinking channel. Feelings and relationships, which is our heart. And that is pretty much what we might call the feeling channel, and the bigger compassion that needs to hold it all together. So compassion for ourselves, for others, and for the overall vision of healthy children and families. And so we might call the gut our intuition channel conversations. So feeling, thinking, and sensing, when brought together, brings a deep understanding for navigating every type of situation. So we're wired to use these three different types of perception all together. And when we do our inner compass, we get activated and it keeps us aligned with our values and our purpose. When we don't activate our inner compass by checking in with our feelings, our needs, and our values, we can feel stuck and get hopeless and possibly depressed, which I think we all agree is not a good thing. So the outline, guide, and full training will offer simple methods for regaining clarity and exposure using non-polarizing language to build bridges in self-care so you can stay fully present and be at your best. So this guide gives you a 4-step process you can use along with your team. Slide. And this 4-step process is, of course, easier said than done, but learn to replace blaming language with feeling words. And if anybody wants to drop in the chat, maybe an experience you've had, that won't necessarily come off mute, but maybe it's an experience you've had with hidden feeling exercise. The second thing is learn to apply that idea in conversations with decision makers. And then third thing, we want to practice translating statements from decision makers into feelings, needs, and value statements. And lastly, we have to role play to prepare for conversations. I would like to see just a few hands of individuals who have had that experience of role playing to prepare for conversations with conservative states lawmakers. Just a show of a few hands. And I will definitely raise mine as well. Okay, absolutely, absolutely. So this online guide gives you pointers for using your intellect, emotional intelligence, and your intuition, or your gut feelings to build bridges and find common ground. And so we want to make sure you take a look at the need, values, and feelings list in the guide. So make sure that you are kind of taking a look into that. Next slide. So let's talk about our needs for a quick second. So there are fewer than 20 core needs that all human beings share, and what we all need in order to thrive and flourish, reach our potential, and feeling fulfilled, right? When a core need is met, we feel some sort of happiness or relaxation. And when a core need isn't met, we feel some sort of unhappiness or unease. I believe I read in the chat earlier where someone says that doing this work or they're passionate about when they feel at ease or when they feel content. I really love that comment. And I'll take a pause really quickly. Ben Shumas, I see that your hand is up, or was that for when I asked who has had to role play for conversations?
Yeah, I was just raising it for the thing. It didn't lower down. I'll lower it now.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to double check. But yes, I just wanted to highlight that comment that I saw earlier about feeling content when we're talking about our needs and feeling ease. So I also want to get into our values. So our values are not something that we're born with. They are choices we make based on our personality, our beliefs, our culture, environment, and our life circumstances and goals. So just adhering to our values keeps us in integrity. That's something else that was highlighted in the chat, talking about integrity with ourselves. And our values can change over time, and how we prioritize them can change. I also want to do a media advocacy plug. I usually train on individuals making sure that they keep up with different lawmakers as they change. So as we're thinking about our values and what we're looking for while talking to lawmakers, as you can see, your values can change over time, just as such as your decision makers can. Lastly, we want to highlight your feelings. When needs are met or not met, right? Your feelings are the result. And so you want to stay in your body at all times, and it will inform you on what's going on in ways that you can think before your head can make sense of things. And that's okay when you're thinking about your feelings. This is pretty much just a new way of paying attention for most of us. And we know that this is something that could be newly introduced to you, but we just want to make sure that you all understand and give yourself grace that this all takes practice. It's well worth it though. And once we know how to activate our inner compass and hear someone's underlying feelings, needs, and values, then we can see where we do align. And even if our strategies seem opposed, that builds a bridge between our common humanity. And from there, we can negotiate based on our common ground. And a doorway appears in what used to look like a brick wall. I also want to take the time out to give a recent example that I've been given, is that when you're talking to conservative lawmakers, let's say you have a policy or you have a bill or something that you want to share with your lawmaker, and maybe you already know that they probably are opposed to what you're coming to talk to them or speak to them about, especially if you're had any type of lobbying training, or if you are a lobbyist, or etc. But you find that when you find that common ground, and you might, instead of focusing on the opposing and what's going on and trying to push your agenda. When you find that common ground, maybe not this go around, but there might be a next go around that you may have needed that Republican vote, and they will remember that you all were able to channel each other's feelings and values, and that is something you can use for leverage for the future. So make sure you remember to do that. We also encourage you to use all of this information, exercises, and the guide to build your skills on your own with your team and with your coalitions. Next slide. All right, I'll toss it back to you, Joshua. We're just going to put it all together.
Thank you so much, Laura. Now, next slide, please. Messaging. The final piece of our guide and training is a set of messages that we started with existing messages and message research. Of course, we know that there's a lot of good work out there, and we explored those messages in interviews with electeds and used what we learned to adapt our messages and offer specific pivots for the archetypes. On this slide, you see a list of core messages. From our guide, we can see that if I'm talking with someone who fits into the church and country archetype, I know they probably strongly support a two-parent mom and dad household where mom stays home in the early years. So I might acknowledge that a strong start may include parents staying home if they choose to, and the environment supports their ability to do so. From listening, I may learn that their idea of faith requires helping others, but they believe that churches and communities already have resources to help people. So I might acknowledge in a meeting with them that these resources in your community do exist and how they might need more support or partnership with the state. Or better yet, bring one of their leaders with you to the meeting so that they can speak with them directly. An important note about messages, wrapping everything we've been discussing, thinking about who carries the message is just as important as what you say. Who is best to connect with and relate to the elected's lived experience and perspective? Who will be safe or potentially unsafe in the conversation? The guide also includes tips on working with a coalition to determine the specific approaches. Now, this is, again, just an introduction and overview. And we also want to note that this particular training is being held for advocates from the National Collaborative for Infants and Toddlers 5 States Power Sharing Initiative in response to requests made during our meeting in Little Rock, Arkansas. So there'll be much more to come. And there might be some people that are here from other states, but most of them are from Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Mississippi, and Texas. And we really appreciate you for being a partner in the Prenatal-Three Policy advocacy space. And thank you so much for tuning in. And we also want to note that every moment doing this work is an opportunity for us to stay curious, an opportunity to regain balance and clarity in chaotic and challenging times to advance our goals, even when the rules of the game keep changing, and to address and ease overwhelm and burnout. And so before, we also want to offer the opportunity for you to go deeper when applying this work. You can visit our website to find out more about the archetypes and the archetype training. You can attend a more detailed training or join a community of practice or request technical assistance. And those links are on the screen as well as being posted in the chat. We are working to integrate this approach across more of our work, including the next phase, which we've already begun, discussing threats to preemption and protecting local solutions in decision-making through the archetypes and non-polarizing communication. And so before we close out, Laura, is there anything else that we think is important to add here that we want to discuss? I know that you guys often have robust discussions on the conservative states call that might be worth bringing up here as we open the floor up for questions.
Yes, absolutely. Right before we get into questions, since Joshua has thrown me the mic, I'm not officially sure if we made mention, but I do believe we did make mention. If you were at that Power States convening in Arkansas, we had Will Devine, who is with Civitas, and he did a very in-depth conversation about conservative states. And so what they send us every month is right of center updates on what's going on in conservative states, and also including some good reads. So what I want to do is just open the floor and the opportunity to kind of highlight a little bit of what we include in those emails that we're going to be sending out weekly. And if you hear something that catches your eye, and I will be including some links to some of these topics, and you say, hey, this is something I believe that I would love to receive those emails weekly from us here with Voices. In the follow-up email, make sure you read it in its entirety, and we're going to include a sign-up link so we can make sure that you receive those emails. So on the federal level, we have changing dynamics of political parties. Republicans have spent decades railing against welfare recipients. Now they're deeply reliant on them to win elections. So rural areas that vote Republican in particular grew dramatically dependent on everything from Medicaid to food programs as good. Higher paying jobs disappeared. And so a link for that, I'm gonna drop in the chat. So I wanna kind of do it simultaneously. So if that might have piqued your interest, or maybe something on the state level, maternal health. The Arkansas Legislative Council and Joint Budget Committee began holding budget hearings for state agencies for the upcoming fiscal year. The State Department of Human Services budget will likely see funding for maternal health. And so we have a link for that as well. Of course, you can read these at your own time. And one of the last examples I'd like to share, because how can I not mention Mississippi, is maternal health. This is on the state level. 2 federally qualified health centers in the Mississippi Delta will receive $3.6 million over 4 years from the federal government to expand and strengthen their maternal health services. And so the link to that will be dropped as well. So if this is something that you think is helpful for you, whether it's just some good reads for you, or it can be helpful in your work, please make sure you read that follow-up email that will include this training and some of the guidelines that we've been talking about, and you will find that sign-up sheet in that follow-up email. And so these will be the right of center updates, and thank you guys for your time. Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you so much. Let's open it up then for Q&A. See if we have any questions from any folks or thoughts that folks want to share with us. Feel free to use the raise your hand function to ask a question or share a thought with us pertaining to this training, or how this might be helpful looking at the election that the impending election, or beyond the election, which is probably the most important part.
Well, thanks, Laura, for the information about the Civitas updates. This is Raquel, I'm one of the consultants with Voices. I have really found them helpful. And I was even thinking, even if some of the information there is, say, already understood or known by folks on the ground there, often they'll link to articles or different things that folks can use as collateral when they're going and talking to their decision makers. So it's sort of just like some easy, quick picks with a lot of the issues that are being worked on the ground. So just wanted to thank you for that link.
Thank you, Raquel, thank you. And it's definitely useful, you guys. So again, if you want to be receiving some of those, make sure you sign up in that follow-up email. Danny, I see your hand.
Yes, hi, Danielle Patterson, one of the policy consultants with Voices. So I have a question. Thank you so much for this informative information, because, people are working in some pretty difficult situations. What advice do you have for advocates when, we have these archetypes and they may take the time to learn about the policymaker that they're dealing with, but, a number of these policymakers are not voting according to their own personal feelings. They're voting according to the caucus. And out of fear of, if they don't vote this way, then, they get threatened with, we're going to run someone against you in the next election. So what advice do you have for advocates that, they're trying to establish these relationships, but the relationships, it just really comes down to whatever the caucus says and they run with that?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, Danielle. I believe that the purpose of this all is to keep us all accountable to our core value system, right? And so I think that being able to have an open line of communication with the lawmaker that says, well, I value this and I need this, and this is what my beliefs are, right? And for us to have that bridge built, and we can say, oh, we agree to that as well. Let's say that they do vote along party or caucus lines, and it goes against what they've said that I value. I think that because this initial conversation and engagement has occurred, that has helped them to understand that you are also seeking to understand them and what like drives the decision making, you're now able to come back and say, hey, we met with you, you shared with this that we thought that we aligned, but we believe that this vote goes against what you told us that you value. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Explain to us what that looks like or what drove that. Now holding them accountable to not what you said that you believe, but what they've said and share their own value system is. And I think that that is part of that basic humanity with all of us wanting to remain grounded to our value system. And you may not be able to force their hand, but being able to have the open lines of communication to say, talk to us about this. We want to understand where and why you made this decision. And that can sometimes lead to, well, I would like to do this, but I need cover, which is often something that I've discovered that when dealing with lawmakers or decision makers, is helpful when you're advocating for something to be able to provide cover for them so that they can say, my constituents support this or need this. And so that leads to a different conversation when the door is open because we've sought to understand someone's feelings, needs, and value system. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
Laura,
you.
is there anything to add to that?
Yeah, I also just wanted to add, of course, patience, 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 because we all know that this is a marathon and not a race. But one of the most important things that I think about when trying to give advice on this is just focusing on those shared interests and the practical outcomes. So even if building personal relationships isn't a priority for them, just start by identifying some shared concerns or goals. That could be economic growth or community safety or reducing government inefficiencies, things of that nature. And so just highlighting those present solutions that appeal to their priorities and just avoiding any ideological framing that might trigger any of their resistance. I know that we like to lead with data. We like to lead with emotion and not with data. And I wanted to kind of point that out because Ben dropped in the chat a few strategies on how starting your questions can be a little bit easier. So as you see, we have to just adapt to our environment, and that's okay. We have to make sure we remain respectful and avoid moralizing things and just highlighting our local control and mainly just staying patient and consistent. So those are some of my big advice that I would give in this space. I don't know. I think Erica put in the chat that she's found some of these strategies can also be used for family events, like Thanksgiving dinner and when folks are on different pages. So this can be used in a lot of spaces and just to make sure that we are doing our part and making sure that we're connecting with them and finding that common ground, even if it's not as fun as it could be. And thank you, Ben, for sharing that in the chat. So if you guys take a look in the chat, Ben shared a few ways to start conversations.
Laura, those weren't things I pre-thought of either. I just want to let everybody know, like, I was just going through the guide as we've been going through this, and I was like, oh man, these are really good. Like, as a former lobbyist, like this type of stuff, I have the picture of a specific lawmaker that we were struggling with some early childhood stuff with, and he said some things that slightly offended our coalition about moms staying home with their kids. And in the moment, a lot of people were upset by that, and many understandably so. And I'd come into him, and I knew him personally, but I was struggling to understand him. And I just asked him about his hometown because we grew up. I found out he grew up not so far away from I grew up. And it changed the narrative so quickly because I asked him, well, how'd you get into public service? And like, it became this thing where I got to feel him. Like, I got to feel his care instead of just what it landed like when he said this thing in a public meeting. And these questions that I just ran across in the guide like 10 minutes ago, I was like, man, this is how you get to that place I got with Senator Hammond. Like, if you can get to the place where you hear where someone's care comes from, it's so much easier to then leave that conversation, say, hey, you mind if I circle back with you and ask you some questions? And then the one at the end here of like, are there things you could see yourself supporting in this area? That's a great question. And they might say no, but they could also say, oh, well, I could support some of this. And like, I just appreciate that the guide has links in it that take you to places that have more information with practical solutions. So thanks for putting that in there and this great presentation.
Thank you so much, Ben. We appreciate that. And for giving us a really good explanation of those questions. So there it is, you guys. Make sure you taking a look at that guide. There's some gems in there.
It's totally online and you can go through it at your own pace. So we really encourage you, like, you don't have to complete it all in one sitting. You can go in and start and then go through the modules on your own time. So please do utilize it as a resource. Reach out to us if there's things that you find that you think would be helpful to add, or if you believe things are missing. We are here to support, be supportive, and to be a resource to you as you continue to do great advocacy work. Kathy.
One of the things that I have found is, again, back to energy and capacity. And depending on how many people that your team consists of working on a particular issue, I have had to do some analysis in advance to see where it's best to invest my energies and encourage others, because there are some who are not going to move for various reasons. A lot of them now, at least in our state, are very much responsible to the machine because of they are more of a threatening communication that they have with their members. In other words, next year you won't be the chairman of the so-and-so if you don't do exactly what I say. Or if I want to move up to be a chairman of the so-and-so, I need to do exactly what the speaker says or the lieutenant governor says or whoever. So I kind of look at those people and say, now my energy better spent on some other ones who have the integrity or who are able to have the communication that don't seem so married to the hierarchy within the legislature. Because when you get there, people who aspire to be a leader of the legislature and then move to perhaps another elected office, sometimes it's a different conversation with those people than it is with people who are strictly there to serve their constituents and to have a different attitude toward the purpose of their being in the slot they're in.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right, Kathy. And as a fellow Mississippian, I definitely can understand, and I put in the chat, the good old boy system that we've all have heard of before. So I thank you all. Thank you for that comment. Thank you, Samantha, for your comment in the chat, everybody that participated. I don't know if anybody else had any other questions or closing thoughts that they wanted to share before we wrap this up. All right.
Wow. Thank you all. You guys have a great day.
Thank you all for joining.